From your Canvas quiz opener, you should have determined the key piece of information for each of our three forms. We'll quickly go through those. Vertex form, you can always nice and easily find your vertex. Remember that when we're given vertex form, my vertex is the opposite of this inside of the parenthesis. That gives me the x value, and then the last number there gives me our y value. In standard form, my standard form looks like this, ax squared plus bx plus c. And standard form, I can always find the y-intercept by just looking at your c value. Factored form is where I have two sets of my parentheses, each with one x inside of them. From that factored form, we can always find our x-intercepts by just taking the opposite of whatever numbers are inside of those parentheses. Okay, we're going to read through a couple scenarios here, and what we want to do is just decide which form of the quadratic equation would be the most beneficial to use based on the key piece of information we know from the problem. So we're not going to be dealing with any numbers just yet. For these first couple, we just want to tell which form would be best. So number 1 says, the path the ball takes when thrown in the air is described by a given equation. So if I think about my quadratic here, I'm guessing that the ball is starting a little bit off the ground. It's going to jump up and come back down. So part A says, what is the highest point the ball reaches? If I look at my picture, the highest point would be up here. This is my vertex. If I need the vertex, what form should I use? Well, I should use vertex form. Part B says, how far away from the person does the ball land? Well, here would be my person, right? They're tossing that ball up in the air. The ball goes in the air and then it lands over here. That point is where it crosses the x-axis, so that is my x-intercept. And the easiest form to find x-intercepts would be factored form. Part C says, at what height did the person throw the ball? Looking at my picture, it looks like my person is right here. I'm looking for this height, which is where it crossed the y-axis. That's my y-intercept. And we know the best form for y-intercept is always standard form. Whenever you're doing these problems, I recommend drawing a picture first, and then you should be able to find which form is best. Go ahead and try number 2. For number 2, I'm assuming the rocket starts near the ground over here. It's shooting up in the air and then eventually coming back down. For part A, we are looking for the maximum height, which is up here at our vertex, so we should be using vertex form. And for part B, we're looking for where the rocket hits the ground, which would be an x-intercept, so I should use factored form. For number 3, we had a diver jumping off of a diving board. Here is my picture. I've got our little diver. Here's my diving board. He's jumping up, and then eventually we'll hit the water over here. If we're looking for the height of the diving board, that would be my y-intercept, so I should use standard form. And in part B, we're looking for how long it takes the diver to hit the water. Hitting the water would be over here, my x-intercept, so I should use factored form. For the next couple of questions, we will actually be given equations, and we're going to use what we know about these 3 forms to help us answer these questions. So number 4 says, which of the following is equivalent to the expression below? Explain why you chose that answer. This is the form they give it to me in. This looks like it's in standard form. And if I quickly look at all of my answers, all of these guys are in vertex form. So what they're asking you to do is convert this from standard form into vertex. There's a couple ways that you can get this answer. One of the ways we could use our little formula of negative b over 2a. Looking at standard form, my a value is 1, my b value is 6, and my c value is 4. So plugging in, I would have negative 6 over 2 times 1. On the top, I'm going to simplify here. I get negative 6. On the bottom, 2 times 1 is 2. And negative 6 divided by 2 gives me negative 3. So far, I know that my vertex has an x value of negative 3. From here, I would stop and look at your answers. I know if I have an x of negative 3, that inside of these parentheses, it should be opposite, meaning it must be a positive 3. So I'm going to cross off C and D. They both have negative 3's there, so I know it can't be either one of those. Now to find whether my answer is A or B, it looks like I do need to find the y value of my vertex. So to do that, we plug in our negative 3 into these x's. So negative 3 squared plus 6 times negative 3 plus 4. I'm going to go ahead and type that into my calculator. So I have negative 3 squared plus 6 times negative 3 plus 4, and we get negative 5. Okay, if the y value is negative 5, that means my answer should be B. Another way that you could solve this problem is to use your graph. So if I wanted to use my graph, what I would do is start with graphing the equation they give me. So I'm going to go to my y equals, and I'm going to clear this out and type in this equation instead. So I have x squared plus 6x plus 4, and I'm going to graph it. Now I can't see exactly where that vertex is, but I could kind of take a guess. It looks like it's at negative 3-ish, and then I know it's at negative 5 now. So you could always use this graph to help you find that vertex and get it into vertex form. Go ahead and try number 5. Hopefully you noticed on number 5 that we could do a little bit less work on this one. Again, it does give me the equation in standard form. It also gives me the graph here. And they're asking me to find again which one of these matches it, and these are all in vertex form. Just like we saw with number 4, if I want vertex form, I know that I need the vertex. Now you could have done negative b over 2a again to get this from standard form to find your vertex, or you can just look at your graph. I looked at the graph, I know this guy's my vertex here, it's at 1, negative 4, and then it's just a matter of finding which of these vertex forms matches that vertex. It should be opposite of the positive 1, so I knew I was looking for a negative 1 inside of the parentheses, and the y value was negative 4. Now this problem does also say that we want to explain why we chose that answer. Your explanations could say a variety of things. We could say that the vertex is at 1, negative 4 based on the graph. Which matches B, and then I would just leave it as that. If you did something different, maybe you typed this equation into your calculator, you could have that as your explanation. Maybe you use negative b over 2a to find the vertex, so you would have that as part of your explanation. Number 6 says the equation below represents a parabola in the xy plane. Which of the following equivalent forms of the equation displays the x-intercepts of the parabola as constants or coefficients? Again, we'll have to explain. So it looks like they give it to me again in standard form, but this time they want me to find x-intercepts, which means that I should be looking for this in factored form. Factored form is the form that shows me x-intercepts, so I know my answer needs to be in that form. I'm going to pause for just a minute and look at all of my answer choices, and I'm going to cross off ones that are not in factored form. So A is not in factored form, B is not, C is not. It looks like D is the only one that's actually in factored form. Now, I know that D is my answer because it's the only one in factored form, but I do want to show you what you would do if maybe you had another option here that was also in factored form. The easiest way to do this is to plug this guy into your calculator, and let's just look at our graph. So in my calculator, I'm going to go to y equals, I'm going to erase the stuff that I have and type in this new equation. So I'm typing in x squared minus 6x plus 8, and I'm graphing. I'm going to sketch my graph here. It's not going to be perfect, but that's okay. I'm focusing on x-intercepts because I know that's what I'm looking for in factored form. So I see it crosses at +2, and it looks like +4. This is kind of what my graph's looking like, 2 and 4. The only other thing we need to know is that when I'm writing this in factored form, inside of those parentheses is always opposite. So that's why this +2 became negative and this +4 became negative. Again, we do want to explain why we chose that answer. So I'm just going to write in words kind of what we did for this process. So I'm going to say I graphed the function or the equation in my calculator and looked for the x-intercepts so we could write in factored form. Go ahead and take a minute to try number 7. Once you plug in the standard form that they give you, again, we should be really focusing on our x-intercepts so we can get this into factored form. My calculator looked like it crossed at -2 and 6. Hopefully yours matched there. And then from there, we should be looking for factored form. So we could have crossed off B and C. Those were in vertex form. So I'm left with A and D should be my correct answer because it's opposite of where it crosses the x-axis. So that -2 becomes positive and +6 becomes negative. Make sure you wrote down an explanation. I would have said I graphed this equation in my calculator, looked for those x-intercepts so that I could make them opposite and write this in factored form. Let's do one last one together, number 8, and this one is an easy guy. Number 8 says the graph of which of the following functions in the xy plane has x-intercepts at -4 and 5. So again, I'm focusing on x-intercepts, which means I want this in factored form. I'm going to look at my answers and cross off anything that's not factored form. Looks like A and B are both in factored form, but C and D are vertex forms. I'm going to cross those off. And then it tells me the x-intercepts are at -4 and 5. So I don't have to graph it in my calculator. It's already telling me where it crosses that x-axis. All we have to do is make sure that we make them opposite before putting them in the parentheses. So this -4 should become positive, looks like it did right here, and that +5 should become negative. So my answer is A.